Hello, everyone. My name is Sananda. I'm a senior product manager at AWS. And with me, we have Prasad.
Hello everyone, Prasad Rao here. I am Principal Partner Solutions Architect here at AWS.
And today we're going to be talking about how to port that .NET Framework application to .NET 6 using the tool Porting Assistant for .NET. So we'll first start with a brief overview of .NET and why you should port your applications to .NET 6. Then we'll talk about what is Porting Assistant for .NET and where it comes in the picture. After that, we'll talk about how to use the tool and we'll show some screenshots, followed by a demo that Prasad will walk you through how to actually port an MVC web application to .NET 6. We'll cover some resources and also a recap of the presentation. So let's get started. All right, so .NET started, in 2002 when the first version of .NET was introduced, a .NET Framework. And those versions are Windows only, meaning you can only run them in Microsoft Windows environments. So the biggest benefit we see customers cite and want to move to .NET 6 is the license freedom that it gives you. The modern .NET versions like .NET Core 3.1, .NET 5, .NET 6, and soon .NET 7 are all cross-platform, and they can run on both Windows or Linux. So by moving to .NET 6, you basically get a lot of savings from the Microsoft license freedom that you get. In addition, you can also containerize your applications and deploy it to more modern cloud solutions. So the modern .NET applications are much better suited when you want to think about running it on containers or serverless architectures, so giving you that optimization of your legacy applications. The other benefit when we see is also performance improvements. So when customers run the applications, the same application running on .NET Framework versus on .NET 6, you see a significant performance improvement when you run it on Linux and .NET 6 and modern .NET Core versions. And the last is it opens up the opportunity to run it on ARM instances like Graviton EC2 instances, where you get even more performance improvements. So these are some of the reasons why we see customers want to move from .NET Framework to .NET Core versions. So as you can see here, we're looking at, we did some tests on a lot of different types of instances, M series, R series, and C series, across the same .NET workload running on Windows, running on x86 Linux, and running on Linux on Graviton instances. And you can see in some of these scenarios, the cost savings is almost 50% when you compare the Windows .NET legacy application versus the .NET Core application running on Graviton. And even with Linux, you're getting significant cost savings when you move to the more performant .NET versions on Linux. So, this is really brings up a compelling reason for customers when they start thinking about moving from .NET Framework to modernize to .NET Core. So now that we know it's really important and beneficial for customers to move their applications, let's talk about what some challenges are. So, it's a big task to take moving your .NET Framework applications to the modern .NET versions, and porting is a significant effort. So some of the reasons are the NuGet package dependencies. Your legacy .NET Framework applications may contain a lot of NuGet dependencies, and not all of them have the equivalent functionality in .NET Core. So already you have this barrier of not knowing which NuGet dependencies work in .NET Core and then which don't. And even when you inherit legacy applications, a lot of times we see customers don't really know what the inventory and application structure is. So you want to just have an understanding of where your application is today in the .NET Framework world, and how do you take it to the .NET Core and Linux compatible world. And that leads to the second issue, which is assessing the portability between .NET Framework and .NET Core. The packages that you have in NuGet packages and API configurations, you need to understand what the manual effort and the time is going to be to move those over to .NET Core. So customers generally coming from a .NET Framework development environment may not necessarily have all the understanding to be able to properly assess how to move their application to .NET Core. So this is where we see customers also struggle, is to really assess what that scope and effort is going to be so they can plan the bulk of their majority legacy applications transformation to .NET Core. And the last effort we see is once you've actually understood the inventory of your framework application and you've understood what the effort and size of the work is going to be to move it over to .NET Core, you still actually have to do the work to execute the changes, the configuration changes, the new templates. And even that alone is a lot of manual work that is undifferentiated and takes away time from building business critical applications for customers. So all of these complexities and ambiguity in the process makes it a pretty challenging task when you think about moving your legacy applications. And so, this is where Porting Assistant for .NET comes in. So Porting Assistant for .NET is an open source tool that quickly assesses your application in .NET Framework, analyzes it, and helps port it over to the modern .NET versions, .NET Core 3.1, .NET 5, .NET 6, and then soon .NET 7 once it's GA'd as well. So we have it available both as a standalone tool that you can download locally in your machine and as an extension in Visual Studio that you can download and get going. So what it fundamentally does is it looks at your .NET Framework application and tries to present an information of all the NuGet packages and APIs as the inventory for your application. So with that assessment and scanning, it generates sort of a compatibility assessment report where it looks at all the configurations and recommends replacements to make them compatible when you think about porting to .NET Core. And then it takes it even further by actually assisting by kickstarting the process of porting by updating some of the project reference files to kickstart porting efforts. So some of this we'll see in the next couple of slides and also in the presentation. So this is just to show an overview of how the tool looks like. We'll go deeper in the demo, but as you can see on the left, we have the standalone tool that you can download locally in your machine, and it gives you an overview of all the projects and incompatible packages, and also where possible, it suggests replacements for how to make it compatible. That same information is also presented in Visual Studio in the warnings window, where you can see the list of packages that are incompatible and how to make them compatible based on the recommendations. So the functionality between both the standalone tool and the IDE extension is it's all the same. It just depends what your preference is and how you want to use it. We see a lot of developers staying in Visual Studio as their environment and IDE of choice. So we see customers try to use the extension. We also see customers want to download it locally and then run the standalone version. So both have the same functionality, just presented in a way that makes it more meaningful for you. So one of the key features of Porting Assistant is the code translation feature. Now, I want to be clear that Porting Assistant's goal is to reduce the manual effort and uncertainty, but there's always some amount of manual effort that you will do after Porting Assistant has provided you some recommendations and done some of the code changes. So it's not a clear magic button, but it helps reduce the effort on our customers. So the code translation feature, again, is fully open sourced on GitHub. And what it does is it relies on a set of predefined rules between packages and APIs in .NET Framework and .NET Core world. And it automates some of the porting experience of changing the project reference files, converting the configurations based on the predefined rules that are present in CTA. So it will identify common issues such as, if you're using Entity Framework or you have an MVC app, and make the appropriate changes in your source code to reduce that manual effort and uncertainty on the customer side. So, for example, in the demo, we'll soon see an MVC application being assessed and ported using Porting Assistant. So some of the things that it does if you're running an MVC application and you want to move it to, say, .NET 5, 6, or .NET Core 3.1, is it creates the new CS project reference file template and updates the namespaces that are in ASP.NET Core MVC format. And it also has the required templates for startup CS and program CS for kickstarting the startup of your application. And the framework files that are no longer needed, like bundle config, global ASAX, it archives those files for you, so it's some of the work that's irrelevant in the .NET Core world. It's archived from the code. And then it makes other code changes depending on your applications, like interface, declarations, invocations, attributes, etc. So we'll take a look at the demo, and then this is what Coding Assistant does. If you also have database connections, so it will look at the type of database connections you have and also make some changes on those angles. So for example, if you're using Entity Framework, it looks at the NuGet packages and adds the appropriate ones for EF Core, Entity Framework Core, so that it's compatible and allows you to connect to the database with .NET Core code. Like in MVCs, it will update the namespaces in your code files and adds on configuring method to your DB context classes, so you can connect to your database still with the .NET Core code. And if you have ADO.NET, then it also looks at the packages that are needed in the CSproj files, and any reference to the ADO.NET code in .NET Framework namespaces updates it along with some of the other compatible packages. So it will also migrate your connection strings to new app settings file in some cases, depending on how your code is. And these are just a high-level kind of overview of code changes that Coding Assistant makes to reduce the effort on the customer side. So with that, let's actually take a look at the demo of how an ASP.NET MVC web application is converted to the latest LTS-supported .NET 6 using Coding Assistant for .NET. So I'll hand it over to you, Prasad, to show the demo.
Thank you, Sunanda. So yeah, from the demo perspective, we'll look into both the standalone and Visual Studio. Let's start with standalone. I'll walk you through the tool, but the actual, assessment and the code changes we'll do in the Visual Studio. So when you download the standalone tool and you run it, this is how it looks on the start. You can always click on Get Started. There is the documentation list and everything here on the home page. For the first time, it'll ask you to do the settings. So if I click on settings, few settings that it is going to ask you is to give an AWS profile. In data sharing, it is optional whether you would like to enable it or not. And the target framework, whether you would like to port it to .NET Core 3.1, .NET 5, or .NET 6. It provides all the three options. So I've chosen .NET 6 because that's the latest LTS version, and we'll port our application to .NET 6. When you click Get Started here, this is where it provides you option to assess a new solution. I've already assessed one of the solution, Knock Commerce, and we'll look into it. So when you see, okay, let me go back and show here there's a solution. So here, if you see, it shows some information after the assessment. For example, the number of projects it has and the number of projects that have been ported. It shows that 0, it has not been ported yet. The number of incompatible packages, there are total 56 packages that is used by the solution, and there are 52 out of it as incompatible APIs, and the porting actions. We'll drill down more into the porting actions in a moment. And when you look into the more detailed version of it, the assessment overview shows the same information that was there on the assessment dashboard. But if you see then below, there are 5 tabs which helps you to drill down further. Projects. It helps you to look into the information at a project level. So this information about incompatible packages is at a solution level. But if you'd like to look into the project level, this is where you can look into it. It shows that there are 38 packages that are being used in nop.web project, and 36 of them are incompatible, so on and so forth. The entire and shows which projects are ported and not ported here. Then project references. This is where it shows the full project dependency graph. You can zoom in, zoom out, and it shows which projects are dependent on how many, and it depends upon your modernization strategy that you would like to go to inside out or outside in, how you would like to strategize modernizing or porting your application. Then let's look into the NuGet packages view. It lists all the NuGet packages that they have, the current version of it, the number of projects this particular package is being used, the number of source files this particular package is being used, the number of APIs, the status incompatible, and if it has a suggestible replacement, it is going to suggest you that. Similarly, for APIs, We have a view about the API calls that it is being making, what packages relates to, how many source files, how many calls it is being to done. So it gives us a view. So it is helps developers to actually estimate even before starting the porting about how much effort it will be required to port the applications. And finally, at the source code level view, right? So it for every source file, it's going to show how many compatible API calls, and it can even drill down further. For example, if we go into this controller, it shows the porting action. This is where, so all the porting actions that we were seeing, this is where it shows, this particular is no more compatible. It needs to be updated with this. And this is something that porting assistant can do on its own for yourself. It is going to replace this particular namespace with the latest version of the namespace. But then there are incompatible method invocation. So this is something that it is going to highlight that this is something that where a manual action would be required. And it provides this information at every source file level for every project and so on and so forth. So this gives you a good enough idea about how you would like to start porting. But this is where developers would be going into their Visual Studio and start updating the code. You can also let me go back here, and so we can once you have done this analysis, you can always export this as assessment report into a CSV file if it is required for you to create a business case with the stakeholders, show it to the stakeholders, or create a project plan. You can have all of this information in an Excel file, and then you can use that or do some automation on top of it. If you like to port it, then you can always port them. You can port it at an individual project level. If you select one of them, it gives you option to port project. You can do multiple of them. You can select all and port all projects at once, or you can port the entire solution at once. It gives you all those options. But let's do all of that within the Visual Studio itself. Okay, so what I'm going to show is, in the Visual Studio, I've taken a more simpler ASP.NET MVC application for the purpose of showing the whole, porting end to end. So this particular application, if you see, it's a common pattern that we have. It has a common project, which is nothing more than just just a model that we have. Then we have a data access layer. We have a project for data access layer, which connects to actual database and gets you fetch the data. And ASP.NET example is more of where you have your controllers and views and that. So it's a simple project which follows the normal standard. Let me show the so it is .NET Framework 4.7.1. So it is in the older version of the .NET, and we are going to actually port it to the latest version of the .NET. Before doing that, let me run it. Let's try now. Yeah, works. So it's a simple application. I've changed the text of it on the screen, and for the database connectivity, just added a catalog, which is a few items, and there's just a normal CURD operation that you can do, right? So it's a normal ASP.NET application with a connectivity database. And for the database, I'm using the SQL Server, and to keep it simple, let me show it. I'm using the in-memory, here itself, not having a separate database, but within the application here itself, MDF file and connecting to it. So that's the application, and let's start, assessing it within the Visual Studio and porting it. So for that, we have extensions. Let me go back to Visual Studio. So we have Porting Assistant for .NET as an extension. You can always install it from the Manage Extensions. So I have it installed here. So you can install. Let me close this. And then there are a few settings that you have to provide when the first time when you're configuring it. You can choose the target of your choice. This is .NET 6. Data sharing, yep. And the default name profile that I have, that's default on this. You can add your own name profile, right? and then okay. So now what I can do is I can right click and I can run the full assessment. It'll ask me for the sharing probably. Let's see. Yeah, it shows that the porting assistant is assessing the solution. So let it assess the solution. And whatever information that we saw here, right? Information we saw here in these different pivots, we will be able to see that in the warning list within the Visual Studio itself when the assessment is complete. The assessment is successful. So if we go to the error list in the warnings, it does show the warnings, right? So, and it, so for example, let's say, yeah, so it shows, so there are two kinds of, porting actions that you can see, PA0001 and PA0002. PA0002 actually means that, this is a porting action that can be done automatically by the porting assistant, and PA0001 is where you will need porting actions. It does not show all of them. Let me assess it once more time. Okay, it's fine. So now when we start, actually kind of doing it. So let's do it project by project. For example, common. Let's start with common. And let's see if we can see the Git changes, what changes have been done for the common. But before that, let's do one thing. Let's go back here, Solution Explorer, and then let's try and port it. Port the solution from bottom. So once the solution is done, assessment is done, we can port it. And they are porting, this is where it asks you to that whether you would like the recommendations like PA0001 to be applied automatically or not. I'll select that because this reduces the effort for the developers. And once this is done, because you're doing in place, it cannot be undone. So it's always good to do it with a source control version so that you can always revert it back if you would like. So let's do the porting. Porting is successful. And now as the project file has been changed from .NET Framework 4.7.1 to the latest version of .NET 6, it asks us to reload them. So let's reload them. In some scenarios, it is not able to read it automatically. We'll see if that's the case, we will do it around. So yeah, it did it. So for example, the common project. Now if you see, it is .NET 6.0. Now let's see the big changes here for the common project first. We'll start with the simplest one, that is common. You can see that it has archived the assembly info.cs.back. And then for the common project file, if you see the Git changes, it's quite heavy. The original file, framework file, is a huge file that is there. But if you see the latest version, it has just this particular section for showing the framework. And this is particularly actually added porting info. Let me show it in the CS Pro directly. This is added while assessing it. You can always remove this. It's just a commented code. But whenever it will assess it, it's going to add it just for the assessment purpose. That's all, from when it comes to the common. So if I build this common part, the build successful, this is a best case scenario. That means your project was able to be automatically ported without any manual code changes required. Let's increase, see a bit more complex version, which is data access layer, right? Now here, again, you can see the packages config was archived in the example context.cs. The changes were made. For example, here it was, a system.data entity that was replaced by Microsoft Entity Framework code. And so this is where a manual change. And as Sunanda mentioned, there was an on-configuring method that was added to it automatically. Here it says that this is a namespace that is not, it's not there because this has been replaced with Entity Framework core, and DB set is not now part of Entity Framework core, so we can remove this, and then this should be fine. It's a part of Entity Framework core. Finally, this is mainly because in the latest version they realized that instead of passing the connection string, we do something called DB context options. So let me add DB context options of type ASP.NET sample context, and let me pass this parameter options instead of the connection string. And that's pretty much, these are the like minimal code changes that is manually required. And then that should make this also compatible. Yep. Now let's go to our main file where we have the whole like controllers and views. And if you see the changes here, the global.sx file has been removed, like it has been archived, web.config. Now it seems like it has not loaded the latest version. So let me unload and reload it. Okay. And let's reload the project. Now it should show those archived files. Yeah. Now this is the latest one. It shows that the global.sx has been archived. And it has added startup.cs and program.cs, which is kind of the boilerplate code, which comes with .NET, latest version of .NET, .NET Core, and .NET 5 and .NET 6. It has added app settings.json file. All right. So let's start, like making the changes. So for example, first of all, we will see if we have the right NuGet packages. It is Entity Framework Core. We also need Entity Framework Core.SQL Server because we are interacting with SQL Server, and this does not seem to be the latest version. So let's first of all, let's update it to the latest version. Otherwise, we'll have to add the SQL Server of the old version. So that is done. Now let's add the SQL Server one. Entity Framework Core.SQL Server and the same version 6.0.8. So let's install this. Cool. So now we have, so let's look into the project file. So yeah, we have both of them, and yeah, it refers to common and data access project. And as you can see, it simplifies the overall project file. And yeah, this is just, that is added for the assessment part. So you can always remove it. Okay, so with that done, let's start fixing the code. Let's go to startup.cs, right? In the startup.cs, we'll have to refer to the SQL Server, but let's see what, okay, so telemetry is not required. To keep it simple, we'll remove it. HTTPS redirection, and we'll keep it simple to keep it HTTP. And then actually where we need to use SQL Server is here in our configure services. So what we are going to do is that we are going to actually, let me add DB context here. So I've added the DB context for ASP.NET Project 2 so that it can interact with SQL Server. So I'm going to add the namespace, and then it gets a connection string. And that's pretty much our startup.cs is good. Right now, let's go to see if we have the app settings JSON correct. So as Samantha mentioned, it does, try and port your connection strings. So it did port that. So let's see if it is correct. Here's my examples context. Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, the difference that I see is in data directory, it uses the file name directly, but we have a folder app data. So, and because I'm using the local database, so I'm going to add app data here. Now, let's see, because this is local, I think actually I'll have to, copy if new, I'll do that because instead of do not copy, I'm going to copy if newer, and same for the LDF file. Okay. Now with that, connection string should be fixed. What else? HTTPS is not required, so I'm going to remove that. And I'm going to run it on port 80, might be busy, so 881. Yeah. Cool. So now our activating JSON is good. Okay. Let's go to the controller part, and then finally we will fix the view. Home controller should be good. Yeah. No errors here. Catalog controller. yeah, here instead of instantiating, we should be using the constructor. So yes, let's do that. Of ASP.NET example context, and then okay. So this is done. Let's see. Okay, HTTP status code result. So now in the latest version, instead of HTTP status code result, we have status code, and we will cast it to end. So that should fix this particular error. It is there at a couple of more places. So I'm going to copy that. As you can see, HTTP not found has been replaced automatically with not found. So wherever it is able to fix it automatically, it fixes it. Rest we need to do manually with a bit of a knowledge about the old version and the new version. Okay. With that, the error here is also fixed. So controller is all good. Now let's fix the view part. So here, like as we don't have global.isax, mainly it's www root through which the whole UI is rendered, and so that's why let's go ahead and move CSS fonts and images in the www root. That's the new structure where we have all of our stylings. For the views, let's go to our layout. And here you will see that it is not liking the styles and the scripts, right? And that's mainly because, like with the ASP.NET Core, they came to the realization that all these tags are doing is actually emitting a boilerplate HTML. So what we are going to do is that we are going to replace that with a link to the style sheets. So let me do that. We remove this, and I'm going to replace that with this. So in the CSS file here, in the www root, we have fonts awesome, minifier. In the content, we have Bootstrap, and the CSS, we have site.css. So it's all there. So I'm going to just refer to those within the www. And then let's see if there are any errors. It also does not like about here jQuery and Bootstrap. So let me replace that with similar. Okay. And then it says render section script. So yeah, instead of rendering section, so like let me show this. If I go to catalog items and create, this is where it is going to show the extra jQuery values. So instead of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify it by removing the render section, keeping it here. And then now that is going to do for all the other pages. So I can remove this part here. Similarly, I have in edit, which I can remove because I've put in the main file itself. So this is something that I have done a couple of times. So, like I know the changes. So for the first time you'll do, you need to just figure out a few things. But once that is done, it all should work. Okay. So that fixes this. So let's see if we rebuild this. Yeah, all rebuilt. Now let's try and run this. I'll set it as a startup project. And then okay, I'm going to install that. Yes. Okay. So it was 8081. So let's try. Yeah, it works. So this particular project that is now on .NET 6, fully ported halfway through to the porting assistant, and then few manual changes on top of it to make it fully compatible. So you can see how porting assistant reduces your effort both as an assessment stage as well as the porting assistant stage, porting it. Let's click on catalog to see if the database connectivity works. Yep, it works. That's all I had to show. This is how we do it end to end, and we can do that end to end from within the ID itself. We can port it from here, but your code changes, you can do it, let's say, in your favorite ID. If you're, let's say, using VS Code or Rider, you can always use standalone version to port the solution from here and do the manual code changes in your IDE. With that, let's go back to the slides. Sunanda?
Thank you, Prasad. So thanks for the demo. So some resources, in addition to MVC applications, Porting Assistant also helps convert legacy WCF-based applications. Now, WCF applications don't really have a direct mapping in .NET Core world, but Core WCF is the community-driven open source project to bring parity to WCF applications, and PA supports modernizing WCF applications to Core WCF. In addition, we also have web forms applications, which again do not have a direct mapping in .NET Core, but the programming model that follows the closest and recommended in documentation by Microsoft is Blazor. So Porting Assistant also helps convert some of the web forms applications to its equivalent Blazor configurations in .NET Core. And recently, we also added support for applications written in VB.NET, Web APIs, class libraries, console applications written in VB.NET are all supported using Porting Assistant. Cool. So with that, just to recap a couple of things that we talked about today, porting .NET Framework applications is challenging, time-consuming, requires a lot of effort and expertise from the customer side. And this is where Porting Assistant helps you reduce that manual effort and eliminate some of the ambiguity in the process. It is fully open sourced, and we would love for the community to share their feedback, create issues through the GitHub projects that we have for Porting Assistant. And any questions or feedback you have can also be routed through the email that you see here, and it comes directly to the team. So with that, thanks a lot for the presentation, and we hope you had a good time. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.